Hey there! This video is going to be all about hand embroidery and the use of stabilizer. I've been getting a lot of questions on this channel about when to use it, what different types there are, and product recommendations. So I decided to make a video all about the different types and products that I recommend to use in hand embroidery. So let's get started. So the first thing that I wanted to go over in this video is what hand embroidery stabilizer or embroidery stabilizer in general actually is. So basically, hand embroidery stabilizer is a material that you use to support and preserve the fabric while you're stitching on it. This is especially important when you're working with fragile or stretchy fabrics. It is not essential for hand embroidery, but there are certain instances, like I said, that will help you to preserve the fabric and prevent it from puckering or wrinkling or getting damaged while you embroider. So I briefly touched on some of the reasons why you might want to use hand embroidery stabilizer, but I wanted to go a little bit more in depth about it. So for instance, if you're working with t-shirt material that has some sort of elastic in it, you're probably going to want to use some sort of stabilizer on the back of the fabric while you stitch on it. T-shirt material can be very finicky to work with, and it just helps to really preserve the weave of the fabric and basically make it to where it's not going to wrinkle or stretch while you're stitching on it. This also holds true for fabric that's thinner because it may pucker or get damaged if you don't use a stabilizer with it. Another reason you may want to use a hand embroidery stabilizer is to transfer patterns to fabric. This is a common way to use it in hand embroidery, and there's a couple of different products out there that you can actually print off onto a sheet and use to transfer your pattern. And some of the common reasons you may want to do this is because you're working with a very highly detailed design and you can't get all of the intricate details by tracing through the fabric. This is a perfect way to do it, and you can also use it if you purchase a PDF pattern online and just print it onto the stabilizer, and that way you don't have to worry about transferring it over yourself. So now let's go over the different types of embroidery stabilizers you can use for hand embroidery. Mind you, I'm only going to touch on some of the most common ones. There may be a couple of obscure ones out there that I'm not going to mention in this video, but these are all ones that are pretty commonly used in hand embroidery. The first kind of stabilizer you can use is cutaway stabilizer. This is probably one of the least common ones that you can use in hand embroidery, but you can use it for embroidering on, and it's super easy to use. Basically, this is a permanent stabilizer which you can partially remove by cutting out the excess from the fabric when you're done. But you do want to keep in mind that this will be permanent and it will not be able to be entirely removed. These kind of stabilizers are most commonly used in machine embroidery, but you can use the cutaway for hand embroidery as well. The next stabilizer is tearaway stabilizer, and this is normally made of some sort of paper or fiber that easily tears away when you're finished with the embroidery. This is one that is also not as commonly used, but I personally have used it before. You can use this on the front or the back of your embroidery. It can be a little bit hard to completely remove if you put it on the front of your embroidery, but you can use it as kind of a means to transfer a design if you don't have something that is water soluble that you want to use on the front. Some of these stabilizers that are tearaway may have adhesive on the back, which will help to keep the stabilizer in place, but others may just be completely paper, and you'll have to baste or kind of sew the stabilizer on before you get started. The final type I wanted to go over is water soluble stabilizer. This is like it sounds. It is stabilizer that is made of some sort of glue or film-like substance or paper that dissolves when submerged or placed under running water. This is probably the most common type for hand embroidery that I've seen, and it's also the one that I most commonly use for hand embroidery. These kinds come in printable paper sheets that you can use to transfer a design over to, and there's also another product that I will show you that I also use on the front of the embroidery that doesn't stabilize the fabric as much, but is more of a means to transfer a design. The one thing I do want to say about water-soluble stabilizers is you do have to use some sort of ink or a pen to transfer the design onto whatever you're stitching. You always want to make sure that you test out the fabric and the stabilizer and the pen or ink that you're going to be using, because sometimes in certain cases the ink may bleed onto the fabric or the embroidery floss that you use to stitch the project. So always test out whatever you're going to use before you commit to using it for a final design. A couple of things that you're going to want to keep in mind when you're choosing which stabilizer to use. There are no hard and fast rules to really what you decide to use. Some of it's up to preference, but some of it is kind of taking into consideration the permanence of it, what kind of fabric you're using, and all of those things. So let's go over them. A couple of things you'll want to ask yourself is what kind of fabric you're using, the stretchiness of it, and also the thickness of it. If you are working with a fabric that's super thin, you're probably going to want to use a stabilizer that is not permanent. If you're using cutaway stabilizer on a fabric that's slightly see-through, you're going to have basically a halo around it of stabilizer in the end that's going to show through to the front of the fabric. So you definitely want to avoid using something that's going to be permanent and not being able to remove it. The next thing you'll want to take into consideration is the weight of the stabilizer you want to use. Stabilizers come in a variety of thicknesses, and it kind of depends on the stretchiness of the fabric and also the thickness of the fabric again as to which one you choose. So if you kind of play around with different products and weights of stabilizer, you'll figure out which ones work for you. The final thing you'll want to keep in mind is how you're going to be stitching your project. If you're going to be using an embroidery hoop, then you can use pretty much any kind of stabilizer you'd like, even the ones that don't have adhesive on it. But if you're going to be stitching something and you can't use an embroidery hoop with it, then you're probably going to want something that adheres to the fabric. Otherwise, you're going to have to pin it or baste it, and that kind of risks putting holes in the fabric, and it's just not as ideal. So just kind of keep in mind how you will be stitching it. So now I wanted to go over a couple of my personal favorite product recommendations for hand embroidery stabilizers. The first one that I most commonly use for pet portraits and anything that's highly detailed is this Super Solvy water soluble stabilizer, and I use the medium weight on this. It basically comes in a film that's kind of glue, and it's really good, and I like it because it is super lightweight and translucent, but it's very durable. I don't have any issues with it tearing ever, and I really like it. This is my go-to for stabilizer whenever I need to use it. The second product that I like to use is this Sulky Stick and Stitch stabilizer. This stabilizer is made in rolls, but this one in particular is printable sheets. I really like this stabilizer because you can stick this in your printer. It's standard, letter size paper, and you place it face down in your printer with the stabilizer side down, and it will print your design onto the fabric. My one recommendation with this is to print it on more of a grayscale to kind of lighten up the design, because I have found it, with my particular printer at least, that the ink will bleed a little bit, and you have to be super careful when you're washing it off to make sure that it doesn't bleed onto the fabric. So I just kind of lighten up the design, whatever I want to print, and then it just sticks onto the fabric, and it's super easy to use. One downside with this is that when you're stitching on it and handling it a bunch, it can make your needle kind of sticky, so you're gonna have to kind of wipe off your needle every once in a while, because you'll start to feel it kind of have a little bit of tension on it. It'll be harder to stitch through it. But otherwise, it's super nice to use for, any sort of design that you don't want to have to trace through the fabric. If you're working with darker fabrics, you could use it. So highly recommend this as well. The next stabilizer that I have used, which I don't use as often for hand embroidery, I use it a lot for chain stitch embroidery, which is with my antique machine, but I have used it for hand embroidery, and I've used it on the front of very, basic designs, is this Pellin Stitch and Tear Light. This is a lightweight stabilizer. It's super easy to hand embroider through, and it's basically a paper stabilizer that tears away very easily in the end, and it doesn't have any adhesive on it or anything like that. So you'd have to either put it in a hoop or pin it down to use it, but it works really well and you can trace designs onto it. The final stabilizer I wanted to go over is this Pellin. It's Stick and Tear Away. It is I think this is the lightweight one. I don't have the package for this one, but it is pretty lightweight, and I highly recommend this for embroidering on sweatshirts or stretchy material, anything like that that you need a little bit of extra support, this is perfect because it will preserve the weave of your fabric and prevent any puckering from happening. I have stitched on super fragile t-shirts with this, and it's a dream. It's great. The finished product looks so much better than if I weren't, you know, I wouldn't have used a stabilizer. So this is my go-to for any sort of clothing that's fragile that you need some support with. I will link all of the products down below in the description if you want to check some of them out. And let me know in the comments if you have a personal favorite that I didn't go over today that you think everybody would like. That pretty much wraps up what I have for you today for these stabilizers. I hope this was informative and you enjoyed the video, and definitely take a look at some of the products that I have listed in the description and give one of them a try if you need it. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.